The Battle of Bouvines, which took place on the 27th of July 1214, was a medieval battle which ended the 1202–1214 Anglo-French War. It was fundamental in the early development of France in the Middle Ages by confirming the French crown's sovereignty over the Angevin lands of Brittany and Normandy. Philip Augustus of France defeated an army consisting of Imperial German, English and Flemish soldiers, led by Otto IV of Germany. Other leaders included Count Ferrand of Flanders, William de Longespee and Renaud of Boulogne. The defeat was so decisive that Otto was deposed and replaced by Frederick II. Hohenstaufen. Ferrand and Renaud were captured and imprisoned, and King John of England was forced to agree to the Magna Carta by his discontented barons. Philip was himself able to take undisputed control of most of the territories in France that had belonged to King John of England, Otto's maternal uncle and ally. Prelude. In 1214 Ferdinand, Infante of Portugal, and Count of Flanders desired the return of the cities of Aix-sur-le-Lys and Saint-Omer, which he had recently lost to Philip II, King of France, in the Treaty of Pont-Aven. He thus broke allegiance with Philip and assembled a broad coalition including Emperor Otto IV, King John I of England, Duke Henry I of Brabant, Count William I of Holland, Duke Theobald I of Lorraine, and Duke Henry III of Limburg. The campaign was planned by John, who was the fulcrum of the alliance. His plan was to draw the French away from Paris southward towards his forces and keep them occupied, while the main army, under Emperor Otto IV, marched on Paris from the north. John's plan was carried out at first, but the Allies in the north moved slowly. John, after two encounters with the French, retreated to Aquitaine on the 3rd of July. On the 23rd of July, after having summoned all his vassals, Philip had an army consisting of 4,000 cavalry and 11,000 foot soldiers. The emperor finally succeeded in concentrating his forces at Valenciennes, although John was out of the picture, and in the interval Philip Augustus had counter-marched northward and regrouped. Philip now took the offensive himself, and in maneuvering to get a good cavalry ground upon which to fight, he offered battle on the plain east of Bouvines and the river Marque. Otto was surprised by the speed of his enemy and was thought to have been caught unprepared by the King of France. Although he was under a church interdict, Otto, already an excommunicate, decided to launch an attack on what was then the French rearguard. Philippe Auguste gave battle. His army quickly retreated. The Allied army drew up facing southwestward towards Bouvines, the heavy cavalry on the wings, the infantry in one great mass in the center, supported by the cavalry corps under the emperor himself. The total force was estimated at 25,000 men, a much larger force of foot soldiers and slightly fewer cavalry than the French. The French army of 15,000 men took ground exactly opposite in a similar formation, cavalry on the wings, infantry, including the town militias in the center, Philip with the cavalry reserve and the royal standard, the Oriflamme, in rear of the men on foot. Philip's army contained about 2,000 knights and 2,000 mounted sergeants, with the rest being infantry. Order of battle. Even today, the evaluation of forces is controversial. The classic French historiography often refers to coalition troops 3 times more numerous than those of the King of France. Philippe Contamine is not of this opinion. On the face of it, his opponents did not have a clear numerical superiority. It is said by William the Breton, chaplain to Philip at the Battle of Bouvines, that the lines of soldiers stood in line in a space of 40,000 steps, which leaves very little clearance and predisposes to hand-to-hand fighting. William the Breton also says in his column that the two lines of combatants were separated by a pretty small space. Philip Augustus had then launched an appeal to the municipalities in northern France, in order to obtain the support. 17 of the 39 municipalities of the royal domain answered the call for militia. Arras sent 1,000 men. Abbeville region sent 2,000 men. Paris sent a corps of 2,000 men, 1,750 of whom fought on the battlefield. In total, the Royal Army totaled 7,000 soldiers. The Royal Army was divided into three parts. The right wing, composed of knights of Champagne and Burgundy, was commanded by the Duke of Burgundy-Eudes and his lieutenants. 3 Gauche de Chatillon, Count of St. Pol, Count Wilhelm I of Sancerre, Count of Beaumont and Mathieu de Montmorency, and Adam II, Viscount of Melun. In the front of the right wing were men of arms and militia from the parishes of Burgundy, Champagne, and Picardy, led by mounted sergeants from Soissons. The central battle was conducted by Philip Augustus and his chief knights William Desbarres, Bartholomew of Roy, Gerard Scoffer known as Gerard the Sceau, William of Garland, Enguerrand III de Coucy, and Gautier de Nemours. In front of the king and his knights were infantry from the towns of Ile-de-France and Normandy. The left wing, composed of knights and foot soldiers, was led by Robert of Dreux and Count William of Ponthieu. The main body of the left wing consisted of Breton police and militia from Dreux, Perche, Ponthieu, and Vimou. The bridge of Bouvines, the only means of retreat across the marshes, was guarded by 150 sergeants at arms of the king, who formed the only reserve for the French. Otto also divided his army into 3 groups. The left flank, under the command of Ferrand of Flanders with his Flemish knights, directed by Renaud of Oudenarde. The soldiers were from Flanders and Hainaut. The centre, under the command of Otto and of Theobald, Duke of Lorraine, Henry, Duke of Brabant, and Philip Courtenay, Marquis of Namur, together with many Saxon soldiers, knights, and infantry from Brabant and Germany. In front of the centre stood German infantry phalanxes formed deep, bristling with pikes and flanked by companies formed at each corner. Then in the second line the Saxon infantry in reserve. Otto stood in between, surrounded by 50 German knights. The right flank, under the command of Renaud de Damartin, included equally Brabant infantry and English knights, under the command of the Earl of Salisbury, William Longespee. At the extreme right, the English archers supported the flank of both the Brabant infantry and the nobles of the 2 Lorraines. The battle opened with a simultaneous cavalry charge between the French right and the Flemish left. The French quickly routed the Flemings, who retreated. The serious fighting was between the 2 centres. The infantry of the Low Countries, who were at this time among the best in Europe, drove back the French. Philip led the cavalry reserve of nobles and knights to retrieve the day, and after a long and doubtful fight began to drive back the Flemings. Meanwhile, on the French left, Robert de Drex's troops are at first pressed by men led by William Longespee and Renaud de Damartin, are forced to defend the Bouvines bridge foot by foot. William Longespee was unhorsed and taken prisoner by Philip of Dreux, and the English soldiers fled. Mathieu de Montmorency captured 12 enemy banners. On the other wing, the French at last routed the Flemish cavalry and captured Ferdinand, Count of Flanders, one of the leaders of the coalition. In the centre, the battle was now a melee between the 2 mounted reserves led by the king and the emperor in person. Here too the imperial forces suffered defeat, Otto himself being saved only by the devotion of a handful of Saxon knights. The imperial eagle standard was captured by the French. The day was already decided in favor of the French when the wings began to close inwards to cut off the retreat of the imperial center. The battle closed with the celebrated stand of Reginald of Boulogne, a former vassal of King Philip, who formed a ring of 700 Brabant pikemen, and not only defied every attack of the French cavalry, but himself made repeated charges and sorties with his small force of knights. Eventually, and long after the Imperial army had begun its retreat, the gallant Schiltram formation was ridden down and annihilated by a charge of 3,000 men-at-arms. Reginald was taken prisoner in the melee. The prisoners also included two other counts, Count Ferrand and William Longespee, 25 barons and over 100 knights. The death toll amounted to about 170 knights of the defeated party, and many thousands of foot soldiers on either side. Aftermath. According to Jean Favier, Bouvines is one of the most decisive and symbolic battles in the history of France. For Philippe Contamine, the Battle of Bouvines had both important consequences and a great impact. Philip returned to Paris triumphant, marching his captive prisoners behind him in a long procession. His grateful subjects came out to greet the victorious king. In the aftermath of the battle, Otto retreated to his castle of Harzburg and was soon overthrown as Holy Roman Emperor, and replaced by Frederick II. Count Ferdinand remained imprisoned following his defeat, while King John obtained a 5-year truce, on very lenient terms given the circumstances. Philip's decisive victory was crucial in ordering politics in both England and France. In the former, so weakened was the defeated King John of England that he soon needed to submit to his barons' demands and agree to the Magna Carta, limiting the power of the crown and establishing the basis for common law. In the latter, the battle was instrumental in forming the strong central monarchy that would characterize France until the First French Revolution. It was also the first battle in the Middle Ages in which the full value of infantry was realized. Philip conquered most of Plantagenet's continental possessions, namely Anjou, Brittany, Maine, Normandy, and the Touraine, leading to the effective end of the Angevin Empire. Commemoration. In thanksgiving for the victory, Philip Augustus founded the Abbey of Notre-Dame de la Victoire, between Senlis and Mont-l'Arvec, in 1914, to mark the 7th centenary. Félix Dehau had the parish church of Bouvines rebuilt with a number of stained-glass windows representing the history of the battle. In 2014, the 8th centenary was commemorated in Bouvines by an association called Bouvines 2014. A series of events, including an official ceremony and a show called Bouvines La Bataille, gathering more than 6,000 viewers in Bouvines. Wargames. Frédéric Bayet, Swords of Sovereignty, Bouvines 1214 and Waringen 1288, Ophel de l'Epeqt series, Louis de Felier editions, Age of Chivalry Quad. Citations.